Welcome to What's My Tagline, a show where we put the microphone in front of the people who are typically behind the scenes, those responsible for marketing, sales, social media, PR, and event management. Hello, and welcome to What's My Tagline. I'm your host, Carol Flagg. Thanks for spending your time with us today. On this episode, I'll be talking with Irene Lecker, Director of Strategy at Supreme Optimization, which is a full-service healthcare and life sciences marketing agency that is part of the Supreme Group. Irene joins me to talk about generating leads on LinkedIn. I love this topic. Irene, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, Carol. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. I just love this topic, and I think our audience is going to love it too. But before we talk about LinkedIn and generating leads and making sales and all those good things, as you know, my first question of all my guests, I gave you a heads up on this, is if you had to describe yourself as a tagline, what would it be?
Yes, I actually really loved this question. And I
You're the
wanted to,
first.
no, it's really fun. I don't know what it is, but I think it just brings in all the creativity and allows me to give a nod to my, again, not very traditional journey into marketing. So I was going for something like farm to table, but
Oh,
lab to LinkedIn or synapses to strategy, for example. I think the one that got the most applause from my 6-year-old was brains to brands. So I think we can lean
oh.
into that.
I
Uh,
I I love that. Children are naturally creative, and kudos to your 6-year-old. That's awesome.
I thought that was really cute. No, he was very excited about that. I think because he understood the word brains. And I'm like, yeah, that's what mommy used to do. Now I
Br
work with brands.
Brains to brands. I love that. So, and you've already alluded to it, and I'm really looking forward to hearing, before we actually do talk about LinkedIn, hearing a little bit about your untraditional journey into marketing. I know it starts with brains and ends with brands, but to give our audience a snapshot of your journey, who you are, and where you are today at Supreme Optimization.
Yeah, for sure. This just reminds me of that Seinfeld episode where Elaine just yada yadas over the best part. I'm like, yeah,
Yada
brains to
yada.
brands, yada yada. That's that's what my journey's been like. But no, I think I'm kind of a good representative for Supreme because we have so many people like myself on the team who started out in science and then transitioned into marketing. So a little bit about me. I have a PhD in neuropharmacology from the University of Toronto. So it is about, I'd say, 14, 15 years of biomedical research experience. I did a postdoc as well. So everything was really focused on studying how the brain works. I've studied it from a point of view of seizures and learning and memory. Then the postdoc was all about pain and understanding those mechanisms. So really just a very heavy bench background and just I think for years thinking that I will remain a scientist in an academic kind of setting. And then I think like what a lot of people experience, life throws some things down your path and you decide, you know what, maybe there's a second chapter in this journey. And I've transitioned out of science into marketing entirely due to a Supreme ad, which I feel it's like destiny calling. Um, they have these fantastic ads that recruit scientists, and this is how they've kind of caught all of us in the hook. Because we have about 80 PhD scientists on the Supreme team who experienced a very similar journey to mine. You see an ad that says, do you have a PhD? Do you want to learn marketing? And I'm like, yes, and yes, I would love to learn marketing. And then you apply thinking this is can't be real. This is some kind of a scam. I don't think this is real. And then you find out, no, this is real. There is definitely an agency out there that specifically recruits people with a strong scientific background, like myself, trains them in marketing, and then unleashes them on clients. And it's been a success so far, which is why we've been growing so much. You've had so many people from our team on this show already, so you know that Supreme Group has been
Yes.
growing. But yeah, I think the tagline for Supreme is it's easier to teach scientists marketing than to teach science to marketers. And that's why we've been leaning into that. And it's kind of this idea of who's best to understand healthcare and science than the people who worked in healthcare and science? And that's who we are. So it's much easier for me to find the right audience, understand the pain points, really kind of hone in on how do we get these people to engage with the brand? What do these people care about? Because I used to be one of those people not so long ago. So I joined Supreme in 2019, right before the pandemic. We were a very
Mm.
small team. I was the fifth person with a PhD who was hired. And like I said, now 6 years later, there's about 80 of us. And we are all in the paid ads, content generation kind of sphere. And clients love working with us because we understand their products, understand their customers. And so that's sort of been my not very traditional journey. I didn't think I was going to end up in marketing when I started, but it's been a really fun ride, and I'm really, really thankful for it.
Yeah, you're really living that brains to brand strategy.
I know.
I
That was a
know
good tagline.
it
Yeah.
is a great tagline. And it's, and works for the company as well.
Yes.
As you think about their very cagey strategy, actually. So,
Hmm.
uh, well, terrific. So, let's talk now about LinkedIn. You've already mentioned what your team does from a paid content standpoint. Obviously, LinkedIn has become even bigger than it has ever been as far as a tool for prospecting. So let's start with strategy, right?
Hmm.
If you could give our audience basically this overarching concept of generating leads on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of people get intimidated by LinkedIn once they jump into the ads platform and they're like, oh my goodness, there's just like, what do I do here? And it's an expensive platform. So every
Yes.
mistake costs you a lot. So what we tend to recommend, it's really about kind of creating a simplified funnel because I find that a lot of marketers understand marketing funnels. And so if you think about, okay, we're just going to set up a marketing funnel, but on LinkedIn. So you're still going to have your kind of awareness, top of the funnel content where you're warming up a cold audience, right? And then from there, you're going to build a retargeting audience. And those people are going to see your middle of the funnel kind of education consideration content, like white papers or webinars, right? And then anybody who interacts with that gets to then see your more requested demo, flyers, kind of slightly more aggressive towards conversion content. And when we start with that framework, I think a lot of people have a much easier time taking their, oh, I understand funnels. Okay, that's what we're going to do on LinkedIn. And so as a strategy, it's easier to map um, to kind of like explaining it to both clients and just, people who are new to LinkedIn. The strength, I think, of LinkedIn as a platform is that you can really build those super specific audiences that are hyper, I'd say, focused for whatever your product or service or solution is. We tend to lean very aggressively into member skills. So instead of going after job titles and company lists and emails, you can do that, but it's going to be a smaller audience and you're not really using LinkedIn for what LinkedIn does best. Instead, we really lean into, okay, so who is your target persona? Okay, great. So let's say it is a senior scientist or it's a director of R&D or it's a VP. Okay, so what are those people? What are their main skills on LinkedIn? And you know how you have member skills on LinkedIn
Yeah.
that you can target? Great. So now let's try to build an audience around the skills that those people have in common and then narrow it down by, okay, so what are the main job functions that we're interested in? What are the main industries we're interested in? Maybe we want a double skills filter. And it builds an audience that actually includes all the people that you want, but it's much cheaper. And that's kind of I'd say the trick, the second trick of the strategy. You start by thinking about it as a funnel and you think of your cold audience in slightly different terms than just job titles and company lists. You're still going to get everybody that you want, but it's going to be, again, like making it a much cheaper approach.
What I'm hearing is that you are getting super narrow, right? So it really does become very, more limiting in the sense of numbers, but higher quality.
Exactly. I think for anybody who's used LinkedIn a lot, you know that those member skills are very, very specific. So I find that, especially as a good example, going after directors of R&D, anybody who's done R&D before, people are very proud of the skills that they have. So if you know electrophysiology, or if you do Western blotting or HPLC or anything like that in the lab, and the tool or product that we're promoting can help with, let's say, mass spectrometry or anything of that nature, those skills specifically will be on your profile. So you can find people who would be directly interested in your product or doing research or adjacent to your area by just going after these skills that are already on their profile. Because people really tell you who they are on LinkedIn, not
Yeah.
just through their job title, but also through all of the, groups they're a part of, all the skills that they're trying to showcase. And that's kind of the secret to trying to find the right audience on LinkedIn, at least from my experience.
Yeah, very, very scientific approach, actually, obviously.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, there's the attraction right there. And you already mentioned sort of like, white papers and webinars and a lot of these content assets that are, numerous and can be engaging in their own right, whether they're video or audio or, like you said, webinars and white papers. What have you and your team found to be the most effective in attracting these very targeted audiences? And does it must vary, I would think, or is there a strategy that can apply to almost anything?
Yeah, so that is also a really good question. I think that it's not as varied as you would think. I think that for these types of audiences, they're not as much into hype. They're a lot more interested in, okay, well, prove it to me. So there's a much higher lean into data and credibility and demonstrating that you can do what you say you can do. In fact, some clients that lean a little bit too much into hype really get sometimes destroyed on social media for being too
Oh,
hypey. Because like we get it, like your particular piece of equipment or particular tool can really help with this one process. But these people have been doing this for decades. They are experts in this. So if you say that you can do this, they're going to take you to task, really, for all the nitty-gritty details. And so there's a much higher interest in things like white papers. Those convert extremely well. It's a very high value asset for this type of audience. It shows that you've done your work. These are people who have kind of been trained in a peer review environment. It is also very, in a good way, I'd say, antagonistic. Like a huge part of getting any of the degrees required sometimes for entering into the space, be it medical or degrees or PhDs or anything of that nature. You're trained to constantly question everything, and you're trained not to trust anything, right? Show me the data. Let's take a look at the pitfalls. What did you actually do? What were some of the caveats? And so to convince these people, leaning into data works really well. So if you have, and I think a lot of our clients, that's kind of easy for them in comparison because they have so much data. Data is not a problem. Now it's just how do we package this into a really clear, convincing story? And white papers do very, very well. The other one is, of course, webinars. Same idea. Show me all of your graphs. Show me everything you did. Walk me through exactly how your product, technology, solution, service, whatever, is going to help me with this very, very specific problem that I have in the lab or, in the clinic or anything of that nature. And they're also very risk averse. So leaning more into the data and credibility of the content, that really is what we find converts. I hate to say it, but sometimes it's a little boring, and that's okay. Like, that's actually what the audience is looking for. Not super flashy, but like, yeah, a little boring, you know?
yeah, yeah. You're like, in a way, because I mean, we are, I think, for the most part, talking about the life sciences here, right? And so it is white papers and case studies and data sets. But you're also, part of that is leaning into the persona, correct?
hmm Yeah, and that's true. So I think obviously if you're going for more C-suite level, they're going to be less interested in that. But still, I find that one of our biggest takeaways has been that, again, hype doesn't really work especially well for people in this industry. They'll get excited. They hear AI and healthcare. It's exciting. Sure, yes. But you also have to, and they might click on one ad. But if you want to keep them engaged throughout the funnel, if you really want them to submit that lead form, which is, I guess, something we'll talk about later as another part of the strategy, if you really want them to end up trusting that your company knows what they're talking about, then hype is only going to get you so far. And then you really have to prove that you can do what you say that you can do. So in those cases, I do think that webinars do work quite well. We also just kind of create I say sometimes with content, to choose your own adventure.
Oh,
So you can show a lot of different pieces of content and we do a lot of A/B testing. So it's a fun thing to see how different personas interact with different pieces of content. You can sometimes combine three personas together in one audience and just provide them with different ads and different assets within the same campaign and track who's interacting with what, what's resonating with who. And sometimes it's nice to show ads to, let's say, because if you're part of the same audience, let's see if you're taking directors, C-suite, and let's say VPs, and you're combining them together. And even if they have slightly different pain points, it's sometimes good to show the R&D director pieces that you thought only the C-suite would be interested in, because there is some interest in learning, okay, well, what are the people above me interested in? Maybe some of those assets or some of those headlines or, will resonate with somebody a little bit further down the seniority level, for example. And so we do like kind of mixing it up and letting the audience decide what resonates with them. That's one thing I like about LinkedIn. It's very flexible. So
yeah,
when you're setting up your funnel, you can pause things that don't work.
right. And that A/B testing is obviously critical to any successful marketing campaign, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. You already talked about tracking, so obviously, the core audience listening in on this show is we are probably are definitely salespeople, but definitely marketing types as well.
Hmm.
And both of those personas love metrics, right? Show me
Hmm.
show me the metrics. Um, so okay, I'm going to use that at some tagline at some point. Show me the metrics. Okay, so
Yeah.
but so what do you see using LinkedIn as a lead gen source? What are the metrics that you and your team track? What do you look for?
Yeah, so I think obviously the biggest one is number of leads and cost per lead. So we want to
Yeah.
be within industry benchmarks there. It is a more expensive platform, so you should expect the cost per lead to be anywhere between 100 to 150. And if you want to get medical doctors, it's even worse. But you can
Mm,
definitely get C-suite leads at around $150 cost per lead, and we do definitely track that. We also very much look at the quality of the leads. So if we built our audience correctly and there's a good alignment between the content that we're promoting and what the audience really values, then the kind of titles and companies where these people work should align with what the client wants. So we do a pretty thorough kind of looking at every job title, every company, making sure that the quality of the leads is there. We like working with the sales team whenever they want to work with us because we love to get feedback about are these the kind of titles you're looking for? You know, so I know that you're laughing because it doesn't always happen, and I always
I
think it's so sad, but
I am laughing. I don't mean to. It's just, as the person in my company who does marketing and sales, I'm like, yeah, I
yes,
totally get that.
yes. Because ideally, we give you guys the kind of leads that are more likely to close, right? So I think that sales, understand the pain points of the customers a lot better than we do because we're just one step removed. So that is really valuable. And then on top of that, like if they're seeing that a particular persona is way more likely to close, then let's just get you more. leads from that type of persona? Like, why are we giving you all these other leads if that's not who's closing? So I think that that is also something. But in terms of metrics, I'd say those are the core ones. So number of leads, cost per lead, quality of leads. We're also very much interested in click-through rate. And so that's also something that we track really closely. You want a good click-through rate because that means the message resonates. But because a lot of the times, and this is something we didn't quite get into yet, but the ads are linked to a LinkedIn lead form, especially kind of when we're
Oh,
trying to
right,
do lead
right.
generation, right, in the middle of the funnel. You can click on the ad and you've paid for it now, right? Because when somebody clicks on your ad, that's it, like you paid for it, and they open the lead form, but then they're like, you know what? I actually don't want to submit the lead form. And so you paid for the click. You didn't send anybody to your website. You've lost them the minute the lead form opened. Like that's it. That's the end of the journey. And that's just a bit of a waste of money. So a high click-through rate is not necessarily as important as form completion rate. So we want to make sure that, great, you have a high click-through rate on the ad, but you also want a high form completion rate to make sure that those forms are actually submitted. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of time, a lot of money, getting people to click on fantastic, really catchy, like clickbaity ads, but then the form just
Yeah,
stops them. And you're like, oh, well, but then didn't turn into a lead. So
yeah,
that's another
yeah.
thing we look at very closely.
Is that stumbling block like, oh no, I'm not going to give up my email address? Not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, right,
exactly.
right, right.
That was a mistake that I made early on in this journey. And I love bringing up this example because, like, nobody lets me forget this. But we had a client who had a fantastic piece of equipment that could get DNA out of really, really tricky samples. And one of those samples, and I'm sorry, I know this is a family show, but it was feces. So, feces is a common sample where you're trying to
Sure.
extract DNA, and it's very difficult to do. And so their pieces of equipment can do it. And I said, okay, let's do the marketing thing, like really high click through, whatever. And I created an ad that went something along the lines of, got a, I'm going to spell it SHIT sample, right? Question mark with a little poop emoji, because that is legitimately what they were doing. And the click through rate for that ad, as you can imagine, was very, very, very
Through the
high.
rough, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. However, no, the cost per lead was very high too because the form completion rate wasn't that high. Because people were clicking on the ad because it was a bit clickbaity and fun, which is great, but they weren't interested in actually reading the white paper that shows how they do it. And so that was like we started looking at changing a strategy so that the ad can be engaging, but you don't want it to be so engaging that
Right,
you're
right.
getting so many people to click, but nobody's submitting the form. So,
That is great intel. a- as we wind down here, our 30 minutes together, obviously, I don't think we can have a conversation about anything these days that doesn't include AI, right?
hmm
So I'd love to hear how AI fits into all of this as far as ads on LinkedIn and generating leads, and how you see that evolving in the next year or so or longer.
Yes, obviously, AI is influencing everything these days. The LinkedIn platform is leaning more into some of these tools. If you're in the ad platform, you can see how they have AI generated kind of copy that helps you a little bit with that. They're leaning into some other areas of the audience building and helping kind of leaning into some algorithmic and AI tools to help improve performance of campaigns. They're definitely experimenting, or the platform is experimenting with these tools. From my personal experience, to date at least, whatever AI is implemented by LinkedIn right now isn't very advanced, and
Ah,
we tend to not lean into it. That's always been my kind of feeling with LinkedIn. It's not the best. I'm going to use Meta as an example. I think Meta has a much stronger AI component and a much better, actually, ad platform. So leaning into what Meta recommends is working quite well. Leaning into what LinkedIn recommends, not always. So kind of take it with a grain of salt. Some of them are still kind of money pits and a little
ah,
bit, I'd say, early. But that being said, working with AI tools to help you generate again, I think that AI tools, including like any pick whichever one's your favorite. We can use ChatGPT as an example, but you working with an AI tool to really understand your personas has been invaluable. Really looking into identifying your ICPs using a lot of these, ChatGPT and or AI tools has also been very powerful. So one of the kind of highlight tricks that I would recommend everybody try, type in this is my persona, this is all the information, this is the person I want to target. Now, ChatGPT, please provide me with 5 to 10 LinkedIn profiles that fit within this perfect target persona. And ChatGPT would do that with links to their LinkedIn profiles. And that's really powerful when you're building an audience, because then you can go and find all the groups, all the member skills, everybody else they're connected to. You get a much better deep dive into those personas, again, using some of those AI tools. Otherwise, you would have had to do it manually, and it is very time consuming.
Yeah.
So that I think is one potential of using AI tools in parallel to the LinkedIn platform, but I wouldn't necessarily lean into them yet within the LinkedIn platform, unfortunately.
It's a, but certainly I would think like anything, LinkedIn will figure it out, right? I
Oh,
mean,
they
yeah,
will.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're
They'll get,
just not quite there yet. Yeah, I know this is like timed and everything, but as of May of 2025, I'd say just be cautious when you're leaning into these tools. I think some of them are a little bit behind what you're seeing some other AI providers
yeah.
doing. Yeah.
That is great intel. I mean, been a fascinating conversation. We will have to gather again, I think, for part two here. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. Kudos to your six-year-old for championing brains to brand. I love that.
That's the highlight. Yeah, I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Yeah, I think we should definitely do this again
Oh,
and
I
dig
would
more of a
love
deep
to.
dive.
Yeah, I always do a series sort of as we head into 2026, sort of revisiting some of the topics that resonated and or uh, evolved from one year to the other. So I think we might have to get back on that.
Yeah, perfect. I would love to. This is really fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for joining me. You can learn more about Irene and Supreme Optimization at supremeopti.com. And be sure to follow her and the company on LinkedIn, of course. And you can learn more about this show on the program page on healthcarenowradio.com and connect with me on LinkedIn and email me at carol@healthcarenowradio.com if you have any questions or feedback. I love hearing from you. Until next time, I want to know, what's your tagline?